So how should you set about designing a blended solution? Well, unfortunately, there's no really simple answer. You can't go straight into the creative process, however attractive that might be, without asking some questions first. And I think there's three types of questions that you really do need answers to before you can really start to think about how you actually going to deliver your solution. One of those is, what exactly is the learning requirement? Precisely what is it that somebody needs to come away with at the end of this piece of training? Secondly, what are the defining characteristics of the population that you're trying to train? And thirdly, what constraints or opportunities, if you want to look at it in a positive way, are you working within? What is binding you in terms of factors such as time or budget or resources available? So what impact does the learning requirement have on the decisions you'll make? Well, I think it's a pretty fundamental impact, because after all, your learning requirement represents the end point of what it is you're trying to achieve. And if you don't get that right, then the rest of your effort is, I suppose, wasted. The interesting thing about learning requirements is that they're not all the same. Might sound obvious, but when you look about it, it can range from, on one extreme, putting across some fairly straightforward knowledge, facts or procedures or principles, teaching concepts and so on, through to very, very different types of skills, practical sort of physical skills, everything from driving a tank to lifting a heavy object, whatever it might be. There are skills of interacting with people, and there are skills of interacting with information, what we call cognitive skills, which for many people is actually what they do on a routine basis. You're making hundreds, if not thousands, every day of little decisions, solving little problems. Those are skills that have to be learned as well. And then there's a third dimension to learning requirements as well, which is people's attitudes to the subject that they're learning about. And if somebody has a negative attitude to the subject, I don't know, maybe they hate customers, or they hate computers or something like that, then if you don't overcome that obstacle, then you're not going to get them to listen to any of the other stuff. So the thing about the learning requirement is to try and work out what type of learning it is that you need to accomplish. And having worked that out is then to work out the right strategy for each of those different types of learning. And luckily, over the years, people have pretty well sorted out, I think, some good best practice guidelines for how you teach each of those different types of knowledge, skills or attitudes. And you can draw upon the recommendations from all sorts of past experience. Well, what audience characteristics really do make a big difference to your design? Well, I think there's quite a few. You can look at demographics, age and gender and so on. I don't think they make as dramatic a difference as some people might think, but clearly they will make some difference. I think there are two much more important factors to bear in mind. One is what prior knowledge or skill the particular learners in question are bringing into the course or whatever it is that you're putting together. That makes a fundamental difference, and that's because the more people know about a particular subject, the more experience they've had working in a particular field, they develop quite elaborate, what psychologists call schema in their brain. And that's very sort of complex models of how all the different aspects of what they do fit together. And they don't really have to think about it. For them, it seems fairly obvious how everything works together. When you're a beginner, you don't have any of those schema. You're starting from nothing. You have essentially no prior knowledge on which to build. And because all learning is essentially connecting to previous knowledge, you need a lot more help than somebody who's experienced. So it makes a lot of difference to know whether the people you're working with have a lot of prior knowledge or not. The other thing that makes a lot of difference is how motivated they are to learn this particular subject. Again, it seems fairly obvious, but it's very important. If they don't have the motivation needed to pay attention and really focus in on your subject, then somehow or other you're going to have to engage them. And that takes imagination, time and effort. If you're lucky enough that people are coming to you just dying to learn whatever it is that you're teaching, then of course you can get straight on with the job. You don't have to waste any time engaging them. I think those are the things that really make the most difference. So what difference does it make what constraints and opportunities you're working within? I suppose this is fairly obvious that all design has to take place within constraints. And even if you were James Cameron and you're directing Avatar for several $100 million, you'd still regard that you're having to work within constraints, at very least time constraints about when that film is going to need to be issued. Most of us are working in much greater constraints than that, and very definitely in terms of budget, in terms of time, in terms of the amount of time that students might be available to do our particular course. We might be working under constraints of the equipment and facilities we can use, the skills that we can have available to us, and so on. Now, what is the difference between a constraint and an opportunity? They're essentially the same thing. If you've got lots of money, it's an opportunity, and clearly that gives you design freedom. If you haven't got a lot of money, that's a constraint. So essentially, it's two angles on the same thing. Forces which are helping you in making your design, and forces which are acting against you.